friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to learn some key points when illustrating from a photo. Starting with the base color. This is a very dark photograph, so we're going to be using black. Next we will pick out any areas of high points, which is any area of high contrast, and we are going to use gradients for color variation, so that way it depicts light variances. And then from there we're going to find the perspective of the photo, which is kind of like in the bottom center just above that hedge, and make sure to duplicate similar objects and shapes so that way you don't have to do the work twice over. We're going to pick up colors from the photo using the eyedropper tool, and that will give you your whole color scheme, while keeping in mind that we're also going to be utilizing light sources from the lamps in this photo and creating gradients for those types of shadows and bright lights. We're going to add blur effects to the soft edges of every shadow, that way it actually looks like a shadow. And also we're going to use some patterns for intricate details, like for grass, shrubbery, any kind of foliage. And you want to stagger these shades to add some dimension, not only in hues, but also in light and shadow. And I'm going to duplicate that process for the hedge back here. And you always want to group complex shapes or objects, just so you don't have to go back and pick something that you really don't want to pick up. Make sure we're naming our layers throughout, that way you don't get lost in the page. And we're going to use some radial gradients here, another type of gradient. We're going to use radial gradients for any form of glowing light sources, for instance the lanterns and all that. I'm also going to add a blur to that as well. You can choose whatever blur you would like, a radial blur or a Gaussian blur. And always stack gradients to add extra depth, because I find that works very well, especially when you're trying to be more photorealistic in your design. Now, just like I mentioned before, with these light sources, anything that's very intricate, you always want to make one shape and get the lighting right in that and then duplicate it. So fine-tuning those details. With this I used a linear gradient, making sure that those linear gradients are all staggered and not completely 100% uniform. And then we want to create contrast using our color group that we picked up from the photo with the eyedropper tool, and making sure that we have some nice variations. What I'm creating right now is more of like a wet deck look, I guess you would say, because this is a deck, kind of like I guess it's a bridge across water, because it leads to boats. That's where this photograph was taken. It was taken on like an inlet. So that is what I was creating there, and creating those variations between shadow and light with the gradients. Next, I'm moving on to the character that I'm creating for this piece, and I'm using very simple objects, mostly spheres. And I'm utilizing the pen tool to create custom shapes, like her dress, the actual shape of her face, because not everyone's faces are like perfectly cylindrical, you know? So that is what I'm doing there. I'm adding pen tool points to the dress, and I'm going to be adding a freeform gradient to get a variation of depth and color for the dress. So I'm going to be working on these details, adding a linear gradient there, another freeform gradient here, and then making sure that I get those custom shapes in place. For any kind of human form, I like to build it up out of shapes, because especially if you don't have a human form to work from, it's always good to make it from shapes first. That way you're not guessing by just pen tooling all over the artboard. And it's always good to shape build the custom areas like the neck and the upper torso, just so it saves you on time. You can also pathfind this area. I'm going to do a very similar thing for the hair, so let's just move ahead here. She's coming along rather nicely. I jumped ahead and added a whole bunch of freeform gradients to her hair, and also to the dress to emphasize more depth in range and more depth in the actual dress itself by using differing tones of color. And for the final touch here, I'm going to be creating a obelisk crystal, which is kind of where this whole thing is centered around, not only her, but also the crystal, because she is drawing attention to the crystal. I made sure to create some gradients within the hands to showcase that there is a glowing light around this beautiful crystal. I also used a freeform gradient for the color of the crystal as well. And don't worry, I did not forget her face. Her face will be coming up shortly. For this type of design and illustration, you want to make sure you bring up everything together. So that means not just working in one area, but working across diagonally and building up the whole thing together as one photo. Or, well, at the end of this, one full illustration. So I'm not just focusing on one specific area at any length of time. And this is our finished piece. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give it a like if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.